Give me a man, that we may fight. Imagine a people so powerful that no army in Israel dared to stand against them. A people who ruled the coast of Canaan with an iron fist for more than 200 years. A people who stole the very Ark of God, the most sacred object in the universe, and placed it at the feet of their idol as a war trophy. A people who captured the strongest man on earth, gouged out his eyes, and turned him into a beast of burden, turning a millstone, blind, chained, and humiliated. They mastered iron technology while Israel was still fighting with bronze. They controlled 5 fortress cities that no army could penetrate. They hung the body of a king of Israel on a wall as a warning. They were the longest and darkest nightmare for God's people. And yet, those people vanished completely, as if they had never even existed. They were wiped off the face of the earth, exactly as God had promised centuries before through his prophets. How did it happen? Who were they, really? Where did they come from? And what does their story have to say to your life right now? Who were the Philistines, the most feared people in the Bible? Stay with me until the end, because this story is going to change the way you read the Bible and maybe the way you face your own battles. In the 2nd millennium before Christ, when the great empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia dominated the known world, something strange happened on the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. A mysterious people crossed the Great Sea. They came from far-off lands, some say from Crete, others from the coasts of Asia Minor, others even from the Aegean Islands. They weren't refugees, they weren't merchants. They were warriors, sailors, conquerors. They brought with them something that would change the balance of power in the entire region. The secret of iron, and with it, an insatiable thirst for dominance. The ancient world called them by many names. The Egyptians recorded them as the Peliset. The Assyrians mentioned them in their annals, but Israel knew them by only one name, Philistines Pelistine, in Hebrew. And from the land they conquered, a name was born that echoes to this day, Palestine, the land of the Philistines. But before we look at their fall, we need to understand their origin. Where did these sea warriors really come from? The Bible gives us the first and most important clue about the origin of the Philistines. In the book of the prophet Amos, chapter 9, verse 7, God himself declares something surprising. Did I not bring up Israel from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Kaphtor? Amos 9:7. Pay close attention to what God is saying here. He is comparing the migration of the Philistines with the exodus of Israel. Just as God brought Israel out of Egypt, it was also he who moved the Philistines from Kaphtor. And what is Kaphtor? It is ancient Crete, the cradle of the Minoan civilization, one of the most advanced in the ancient world. The Minoan civilization had palaces with more than 1,000 rooms. They knew how to write, they mastered long-distance navigation, and they had a refined art that made many other cultures of the time look primitive. When that civilization collapsed, possibly due to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or invasions, their descendants scattered across the Mediterranean. Some of them became the Philistines. But the story goes even further back. In Genesis chapter 10, the Table of Nations records the genealogy of all peoples after the flood, and there we find a detail that many overlook. Mizraim was the father of the Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Casluhim, from whom the Philistines came, and the Captorim. Genesis 10:13-14. The Philistines appear as descendants of Ham through Mizraim, which is the Hebrew name for Egypt. This means that before arriving in Canaan, the Philistines had roots linked to Egypt and North Africa. Their story is complex, ancient, and deeply connected to the great migrations of the ancient world. Now, archaeology confirms what the Bible suggests. Around the year 1200 BC, the ancient world experienced one of the most catastrophic collapses in history. The great Hittite Empire crumbled. Cities like Ugarit, Troy, and Mycenae were destroyed. The cause? A devastating coalition known as the Sea Peoples. The Egyptians called them that because they came from the sea in successive waves, bringing their families, their chariots, and their weapons. Among those peoples, there were several groups: the Jekka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen. But the most important for our story were the Peliset, the Philistines. The records of Pharaoh Ramses III, carved into the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, give us the only visual description we have of the Philistines. There, they appear with their feathered helmets, long swords, and round shields. Ramses claimed he defeated them, but the truth is, he didn't destroy them. The Philistines simply settled further north, in the fertile coastal plain of Canaan. And here is where the brilliance of the Philistines lies. They didn't build a kingdom with just one king. They created something unique, the Pentapolis. 5 cities, each ruled by a Seren, a title that has no equivalent in any other culture of the Near East. Some scholars believe the word Seren is related to the Greek word tyrannos, which would reinforce their connection to the Aegean world. Gaza was the southernmost city and the gateway to trade with Egypt. Ashkelon, the port city, controlled the sea. Ashdod was the largest, a religious center dedicated to Dagon. Gath was the city of giants. That is where Goliath would come from. And Ekron, the northernmost city, was a massive industrial center for olive oil production on a grand scale. Together, these 5 cities formed a military and economic alliance that no other people in the region could match. When the 5 Serens joined forces, their combined armies were unstoppable. But the real secret of their power wasn't just in their armies, it was in their forges. 1 Samuel, chapter 13, verses 19 to 22. Listen closely to this text, because it reveals the nightmare Israel was living in. No blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, "Otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears." So all of Israel had to go down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. 1 Samuel 13, verses 19 and 20. Think about what this actually means. The Philistines didn't just have military superiority, they had a technological monopoly. Israel couldn't manufacture weapons, and they couldn't even repair their own farming tools without asking the enemy for permission. It was total dependence economic slavery before that term even existed. The text adds that when the day of battle finally came, in the entire army of Israel, only 2 people had a sword and a spear, King Saul and his son Jonathan. The rest of the army fought with sticks, stones, and farm tools. That is how suffocating the Philistine rule was. This was the world in which God decided to step in, not with armies, not with political alliances, but with unlikely men. And the first of them was the strangest of all. The book of Judges tells us that Israel had fallen into a destructive cycle. They would sin, God would allow oppression. They would cry out to God and God would raise up a deliverer. But this time, the oppression was the longest yet. 40 years under the Philistine yoke, an entire generation was born, grew up, and died without ever knowing freedom. And then, in Judges chapter 13, an angel visited a barren woman from the tribe of Dan. He told her she would conceive a son who would be a Nazirite from the womb, consecrated to God. His hair was never to be cut, he was never to drink wine, and he was never to touch anything unclean. And that boy would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. His name would be Samson. In Hebrew, Shimshon, meaning little son. But there was nothing little about him. Judges 14. Samson went down to Timnah, Philistine territory. And there, he saw a Philistine woman, and he wanted her. He went to his parents and said, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." They replied, "Isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives, or among all our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson insisted, "Get her for me. She's the one I want." His parents didn't understand, but the Bible reveals something they couldn't see. Judges 14, verse 4. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. God was using Samson's weakness, his attraction to Philistine women, as the spark for a conflict that would eventually set Israel free. The divine strategy was invisible to human eyes. On the way to Timnah, a young lion came roaring toward Samson, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. Samson tore the lion apart with his bare hands, just like someone tearing apart a young goat with his bare hands, without any weapon at all. And he didn't tell a soul what he'd done. Days later, when he was passing by that way again, he found that a swarm of bees had made honey inside the lion's carcass. He took some honey and ate it, and from that moment, a riddle was born that would unleash absolute chaos. During the wedding feast, which lasted 7 days according to custom, Samson proposed a bet to 30 young Philistine men. "I'm going to give you a riddle. If you can solve it for me during the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen robes and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't, then you have to give me 30 linen robes and 30 sets of clothes. Tell us your riddle then." Let's hear it. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. For 3 days, they couldn't figure out the answer. So, they turned to treachery. They went to Samson's wife and threatened her. Talk your husband into explaining the riddle to us, or we'll burn you and your father's house to the ground. Did you invite us here just to rob us? She cried to Samson for the whole 7 days. She nagged him, she pressured him, telling him that he didn't really love her. And on the 7th day, Samson finally gave in. He told her the answer. She ran to tell the Philistines, who asked him, "What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion?" Samson replied, "If you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you never would have solved my riddle." Samson went down to Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their clothes, and paid off the bet. Then he left in a fit of rage, and his wife was given away to his best man from the wedding. The first spark of war was lit when Samson went back for his wife and discovered they had given her to someone else. His revenge was incendiary, literally. Fire devoured the wheat fields, the olive groves, and the vineyards. The Philistines' entire agricultural economy was devastated. When the Philistines found out why, they burned Samson's wife and her father to death. In return, Samson attacked them, leaving them in a bloody slaughter. The Philistines marched up against Judah. 3,000 men from Judah, his own people, came to hand him over. Listen to this. His own people preferred to betray him rather than face the Philistines. That's how deep the fear was. "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us? What have you done to us? I only did to them what they did to me," he said. They tied him up with 2 brand new ropes and led him to the Philistines. But when the Philistines shouted for joy at the sight of him, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him with power. The ropes on his arms melted away like burnt flax. Samson found the fresh jawbone of a donkey, grabbed it, and killed 1,000 men with it. "With a donkey's jawbone, I've made heaps upon heaps. With a donkey's jawbone, I've struck down 1,000 men." After that massacre, he was so thirsty he cried out to God, and God opened a spring of water from the rock for him to drink. Samson led Israel for 20 years. 20 years where the Philistines couldn't stop him, but there was a crack in the giant's armor, and her name was Delilah. Delilah. The Bible doesn't say if she was Philistine or Israelite, but she was on the payroll of the 5 Philistine kings. Each one offered her 1,100 pieces of silver. 5 kings, 5,500 pieces of silver, an unimaginable fortune. All for one piece of information, the secret to Samson's strength. "Please, Samson, tell me, what makes you so strong? How could someone tie you up and overpower you?" Samson played along with her. The first time, he told her that if they tied him with 7 fresh bowstrings, he'd lose his strength. She did it, shouted that the Philistines were coming, and Samson snapped the strings like they were thread. The second time, with new ropes, same result. The third time, he told her to weave his 7 braids into a fabric loom. Samson broke free again. "How can you say you love me when your heart isn't with me? You've tricked me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me where your great strength comes from." And here comes the saddest verse in Judges chapter 16. Verse 16. "It happened that because she nagged him day after day with her words and pestered him, his very soul was sick to death." Samson could defeat 1,000 men with a donkey's jawbone. He could snap chains and rip city gates right out of the ground, but he couldn't stand the tears of a woman who didn't love him. He gave up his entire secret. "A razor has never touched my head, because I've been a Nazirite of God since I was in my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I'd grow weak and be just like any other man." "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up and shook himself, but something had changed. The Bible records the most devastating words in Samson's entire story. He didn't know that the Lord had already left him. Judges 16, verse 20. "They gouged out his eyes and dragged him to Gaza, the very city he had once humiliated by ripping off its gates with his bare hands. Now he entered blind, bound in bronze chains, and was forced to turn a grain mill, doing the work of an ox, the strongest man on earth, reduced to nothing more than a beast of burden. Our God has delivered Samson into our hands, our enemy, the one who destroyed our land and slaughtered so many of our people. They brought him out to entertain them, to mock him, and to humiliate him in front of the entire Philistine nation. But no one had noticed one small detail. Samson's hair had begun to grow back. "Lord God, please remember me. Strengthen me just this once, O God." so that with one final blow, I may take revenge on these Philistines for my 2 eyes. Let me die with them. Judges 16, verse 30. Those he killed as he died were more than all those he had killed during his entire life. Samson was a man full of contradictions, strong yet weak, consecrated yet disobedient. However, God used him, and in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, Samson appears in the list of the heroes of faith because in the end, in his darkest hour, he remembered who he belonged to. But Samson's death didn't end the war. The Philistines still held power, and what was about to happen would shake the very foundations of Israel to its core. 1 Samuel chapter 4. Decades after Samson, Israel faced the Philistines in open battle near Ebenezer, and they were crushed 4,000 dead in a single day. The elders of Israel, in their desperation, asked themselves, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let's bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh, so that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hands of our enemies." Listen to the logic behind that reasoning. They didn't say, "Let's seek God." They didn't say, "What sin is in our camp?" Instead, they said, "Bring the Ark," as if the Ark were some magic talisman, as if God were a genie trapped in a golden box who had to obey them. The shout reached the Philistine camp, and then something extraordinary happened. For the first time in our coverage of the biblical narrative, the Philistines felt true terror. A god has come into their camp. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hands of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. But then, a Philistine commander gave a speech that would change the course of the battle. "Be strong and act like men, O Philistines. Unless you want to become slaves to the Hebrews just as they have been slaves to you, be men and fight." And so, the Ark was captured, the symbol of God's presence in the midst of Israel, taken by pagan hands. When a messenger reached Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head, Eli the priest, who was 98 years old, was sitting by the side of the road, watching, because his heart was trembling for the Ark. Israel fled before the Philistines, and there was a great slaughter among the people. "Your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the Ark of God has been captured." The moment the Ark was mentioned, Eli fell backward off his chair by the gate. He broke his neck and died. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, went into labor upon hearing the news. Before she died, she named the child Ichabod, which means, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the Ark of God had been taken. The Philistines took the Ark and brought it to Ashdod, to the temple of Dagon, their chief god. They placed it next to the idol as a trophy proof, they thought, that Dagon was more powerful than the God of Israel. They were celebrating, but they had no idea what they had brought into their house. On the first morning, the priests of Dagon entered the temple and found their god fallen face down on the ground before the Ark. It was as if he were bowing down. They picked him up and put him back in his place. On the second morning, Dagon was on the floor again, but this time, his head and both his hands had been cut off and were lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso was left, the god of the Philistines, decapitated and mutilated by the presence of the true God, without a single human hand touching him. And then came the plagues. Painful tumors broke out on the bodies of the people of Ashdod. A plague of mice devastated the land. Panic gripped the city, so they sent the Ark to Gath. The same tumors and mice struck Gath. They sent it on to Ekron, but the people of Ekron screamed, "They have brought the Ark of the God of Israel to us to kill us and our people." After 7 months of plagues, the Philistines consulted their priests and diviners. The answer was unanimous. Return the Ark with guilt offerings. They made 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, one for each city of the Pentapolis, and they placed it on a new cart pulled by 2 cows that had never worn a yoke. If the cows headed straight for Israeli territory, it meant God had caused the plagues. If they veered off, it had just been a coincidence. The cows walked directly toward Beth Shemesh, lowing as they went, without turning to the right or the left. Even the animals obeyed the God of Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 17. The most iconic scene in the entire rivalry between Israel and the Philistines. Goliath of Gath. The Bible describes him with pinpoint accuracy. 6 cubits and a span tall nearly 9 feet. Bronze scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels, about 60 kilograms. Bronze greaves on his legs. a bronze javelin slung on his back, and the shaft of his spear like a weaver's beam with a point of 600 shekels of iron, nearly 7 kilograms of pure iron, and an armor-bearer walked before him, carrying a massive shield. Goliath wasn't just a warrior, he was a living war machine. Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not the Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. Today I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together, morning and evening for 40 days. 80 times Goliath shouted his challenge, and 80 times all of Israel, including Saul, the king who stood a head taller than everyone else, cowardly shrank back. No one dared go down into the valley. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this shame from Israel? Why did you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the wickedness of your heart. What have I done now? Can't I even ask a question? David's words reached Saul's ears. The king sent for him, and David said, "Don't let anyone's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. You can't go out against that Philistine to fight him. You're just a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued it from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I'd grab it by its jaw, strike it, and kill it. Whether it was a lion or a bear, your servant killed it. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, he will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. I can't walk in these, because I'm not used to them. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head. And today I will give the bodies of the Philistine army to the birds of the sky and the wild animals of the earth. Then the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. And everyone gathered here will know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. The victory didn't come from the sling, the stone, or even the skill. It came from the faith of a young man who knew something all Israel had forgotten, that the battle belongs to the Lord. And the size of the giant doesn't matter when God is on your side. After Goliath's death, David became Israel's most celebrated hero. Women would come out to sing and dance as the army returned. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. 1 Samuel 18, verse 7. This sparked a deadly jealousy in Saul. From that day on, Saul looked at David with suspicion. He even tried to kill him with a spear on 2 occasions. He sent him on suicide missions against the Philistines, hoping he would die. He demanded 100 Philistine foreskins as a dowry for his daughter Michal, thinking David would be killed in the process. David brought back 200. Saul hunted him for years through the Judean wilderness, the caves of En-Gedi, and the mountains of Ziph. David was a fugitive in his own land. And here is the biggest irony of this entire story. Where did David run when he had no refuge left in Israel? The first book of Samuel, chapter 27, verse 1. David said to himself, "One of these days, Saul is finally going to kill me. My best bet is to escape to the land of the Philistines." David, the man who killed Goliath, sought refuge with Achish, the king of Gath, the very city Goliath was from, and the king actually welcomed him. He gave him the city of Ziklag to live in. David stayed among the Philistines for a year and 4 months. During that time, David would carry out raids against the Amalekites and other southern tribes, but he would tell Achish that he was attacking the villages of Judah. It was a deadly double game. He didn't leave a single survivor, so that no one could ever contradict his story. The Bible doesn't try to hide the dark side of its heroes. When the Philistines prepared for the final battle against Saul at Mount Gilboa, David actually marched right along with them. He was about to fight his own people. But the Philistine generals stepped in. "What are these Hebrews doing here?" they demanded. "Isn't this the David they used to sing about? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Won't he try to get back in his master's good graces by handing them our heads?" They forced Achish to send David back. God's providence protected him from shedding the blood of his own kin. But while David was heading back, a storm was breaking over Mount Gilboa. "Draw your sword and run me through," Saul pleaded with his armor-bearer. "Otherwise, these uncircumcised heathens will come and torture me and make a mockery of me." But his armor-bearer was too terrified to do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. The first king of Israel, dead by his own hand in a battle against the Philistines. The next day, the Philistines came to strip the dead. They found Saul and his 3 sons. They cut off his head and stripped him of his armor. They sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to announce the victory in the temples of their idols. They hung Saul's armor in the temple of Ashtoreth and fastened his decapitated body to the wall of Bethshan. But something beautiful emerged in the middle of this tragedy. The brave men of Jabesh Gilead, the very people Saul had rescued at the start of his reign, marched all through the night. They recovered the bodies of Saul and his sons and gave them a proper burial. Loyalty, it outlasted the defeat. When David was finally anointed king over all Israel, the Philistines saw him as an existential threat. The second book of Samuel, chapter 5. They came up with their entire army and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And here is the fundamental difference between David and everyone who came before him. David consulted the Lord, asking, "Should I go up and fight the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" "Go," the Lord answered, "for I will surely hand the Philistines over to you." So David went to Baal-perazim and defeated them there. He said, "The Lord has burst through my enemies before me like a rushing flood." But the Philistines came up to attack again. David consulted God again, and this time the answer was different. "Don't go straight up. Circle around them and attack from behind, near the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam tree, then move quickly, because that means the Lord has gone out ahead of you to strike down the Philistine army." 2 Samuel 5, verses 23 to 24. David obeyed every single detail. He waited for that sound in the treetops, the sound of God's invisible army marching out before him. And when he struck, the destruction was total. The Philistines were swept away all the way from Geba to Gezer. What Samson started with brute force, David finished with strategy and obedience. Samson never once consulted God before a battle. He acted on impulse, on emotion, and on revenge. David asked, he listened, and he obeyed. And that made all the difference. The Philistines were never an existential threat to Israel again. After David's reign, the Philistines continued to exist as a people, but they never regained their old power. They are mentioned in minor conflicts during the reigns of Hezekiah and Josiah. But the most important thing is what God said about their future through his prophets, because every single word came true. Amos, a simple shepherd from Tekoa, prophesied around 760 BC. His message against the Philistines was direct and devastating. This is what the Lord says: "For 3 sins of Gaza, and for 4, I will not relent. Because she took whole communities captive and sold them to Edom, I will send fire on the wall of Gaza, and it will devour her palaces. I will destroy those who live in Ashdod, and the one who holds the scepter in Ashkelon. I will turn my hand against Ekron, and the rest of the Philistines will perish, says the Lord God." Amos 1, 6-8. Look closely. God lists the cities one by one: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and their specific crime, human trafficking. The Philistines would capture entire populations and sell them into slavery to Edom. God's justice isn't blind, it's surgical. Zephaniah, around 630 BC, was even more explicit. "Woe to those who live by the seacoast, the nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, Canaan, land of the Philistines. I will destroy you until not a single inhabitant is left. The seacoast will become a place for shepherds and folds for sheep." Zephaniah 2, 5-6. Did you hear that? Where fortress cities once stood, there would be pastures for sheep. Where armored warriors once marched in iron, shepherds would tend their flocks. And that is exactly what happened. In chapter 47, Jeremiah described the Babylonian invasion as an unstoppable flood. Waters are rising from the north. They will become an overflowing torrent. They will overflow the land and everything in it. Men will cry out, and all who live in the land will wail. Jeremiah 47 verse 2. Isaiah announced that the Philistine gate would be destroyed. Ezekiel promised that God would execute great vengeance upon them. And Zechariah prophesied that the pride of the Philistines would be torn out by the roots, one by one. Every single judgment was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, razed the Philistine cities when he destroyed Jerusalem. Later came the Persians, who reorganized the entire region. Then came Alexander the Great, who conquered Gaza after a brutal siege and sold its people into slavery. And finally the Romans, who finished wiping out any trace of Philistine identity. By the 2nd century BC, the Philistines had ceased to exist as a distinct people, completely absorbed by successive waves of empires scattered, extinct exactly as every prophet had announced. Some of them hundreds of years before it actually happened. The name Palestine survived as a geographic label. The Romans used it specifically to erase Israel's connection to their land. But the people who gave it that name vanished into the sands of time. The Philistines were one of the most formidable civilizations of the ancient world. They had superior technology, advanced military organization, and 5 prosperous cities united under a single purpose: a monopoly on iron that kept Israel on its knees. Giant warriors that no one dared to face. But the Bible shows us something that transcends human history. The Philistines didn't fall because they lacked strength, strategy, or resources. They fell because they opposed God's purpose for his people. When they placed the ark in front of Dagon, Dagon fell. When they challenged Israel with a 3-meter giant, a stone from a brook humbled them. When they enslaved the strongest man on earth, their temple collapsed right onto their own heads. When they oppressed God's people for decades, God raised up a shepherd who became a king. The lesson of the Philistines isn't just about an ancient people that vanished. It's about us today, right now. Each of us has our own Philistines, our own giants, fears that seem invincible, vices that have us in chains, situations that crush us and make us feel like there's no way out. Voices that tell us, just like Goliath did, that we're too small, too weak, and too insignificant. But David's story reminds us of an eternal truth. It's not the size of the warrior that determines the victory. It's the presence of God with him. It's not about the amount of your resources. It's about the depth of your faith. It's not what you have in your hand. It's who you have by your side. In that valley 3,000 years ago, a young shepherd with 5 stones and a sling changed the history of the world. Not because he was strong, and not because he was brave, but because he knew the God who fights our battles. For the battle belongs to the Lord, and he will deliver you into our hands. 1 Samuel 17:47.
This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand.
So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him.